Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 3 quarterback starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be going over matchups at the quarterback position, then going over my 1 through 16 quarterback rankings on the week to kind of give you guys a better perspective on who you should potentially be starting this week. Before we get into that, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community, try to get us to that 9,000 subscriber mark, which would be absolutely incredible. Also, if you guys haven't already, click that like button. It's very easy, very simple. You click that button, it helps me out a lot. I really much so appreciate that. And also, if you haven't yet already, click that bell notification button to be notified when my latest content is out so you can stay up to date on your fantasy news. All right, hey guys, how's it going? Before we begin today's video, also Patreon link is down in the description. $5 a month, unlimited questions answered, etc. Okay, you can check that out. So we're talking about Week 3 quarterbacks. It's pretty cut and dry. I think there are a lot of quarterbacks that have been consistently playing well, going into great matchups, and have to be started. And then there are some quarterbacks that are on the fringe that are going into good matchups but haven't played well. And then we have the inconsistent players that sit amongst the bottom half. But we're going to be going over my top 16 at the position. Before we get into that, let me talk about matchups at the quarterback position this week. I think obviously there's not enough of a sample size. I mention this every day, but I know many of you want to check this out and don't have the ability to check these out on your respective websites. I know NFL.com and ESPN don't really show this, but Yahoo is the place to go. So looking at this as of right now, obviously the Miami Dolphins giving up all the points to the opposing quarterback position. The Arizona Cardinals missing their top 2 cornerbacks. That's always been a struggle. The New York Giants defensively can't stop a soul. Washington Redskins in the last 2 weeks against Dak Prescott and Carson Wentz against division matchups in the NFC East have struggled. There's always a chance that Mitchell Trubisky can turn it around this week. The Steelers have struggled defensively. Even against the Seahawks last week, in which they were up early, but as soon as Ben Roethlisberger went down, Mason Rudolph came in, the entire game script changed. Sure, Rudolph was able to score offensively, but it doesn't help them, especially once they get going against better defenses. I think this week against the 49ers is going to be tough against them, especially considering that not at home. The Eagles, secondary, again, not a great group of guys. And the amount of injuries that the Eagles have been hit with, I think the report that I read was, I think there's going to be 13 players on the injury report that can potentially miss this week's games for the Eagles. That in itself is awful. That does not do them any justice. The Saints, not good against the wide receiver position. Therefore, the quarterbacks are always thriving against them. The Oakland Raiders lost a couple players in the secondary a couple weeks ago. Patrick Mahomes took advantage of that. And I think there's always a chance that, Kirk Cousins, who has struggled in the last 2 weeks, who's been extremely inaccurate and very bad in his decision-making, hurt a lot of fantasy owners with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, can turn it around against the Raiders this coming week. There's always a potential of that. And then obviously the Texans, the Texans, I don't really think they're that bad against the quarterback position. I know they gave up a good chunk of points to Gardner Minshew last week and the week before to Drew Brees, but I don't think they're that bad of a defense against the quarterback position. But Phillip Rivers, as consistent as they get. And then finally, the last of the best matchups thus far is the Cincinnati Bengals. I really want to play everyone offensively against the Cincinnati Bengals. They're going to score, the Bengals, so you don't want to really play defenses against them very often because the game script against the Cincinnati Bengals is often going to be, we have to catch up, therefore we're going to throw the ball heavily. That could force Andy Dalton to throw interceptions, but he's been good about that as of late. So as of right now, in terms of playing Josh Allen, I think if you haven't yet already seen him, he was on the list, last week at number 9. He's only moving up. It's a good matchup this week. Anyway, talking about the tougher matchups, Chicago Bears, they get to play against Case Keenum. Can Case Keenum take on that? He's looked good in the last 2 weeks, and I'm not really, I just respect. Case Keenum has played fantastic. The 49ers, giving quarterback troubles. Mason Rudolph, can he figure it out? Very little experience, didn't play throughout his entire rookie season, pretty much making him a rookie. He has no experience on the field in the NFL, but at least he has Ben Roethlisberger potentially in his ear, coaching him up there, because Ben Roethlisberger did come out and say, hey, I want to be able to contribute to this team still, so I'm going to be in the QB room during the meetings, try to help this kid out and help get this this team back on the track, pretty much. Moving on to Buffalo Bills against the quarterback position. Buffalo's got a good defense, but you never know. Andy Dalton can always figure something out. The Baltimore Ravens get to play against Kansas City Chiefs. No, the Baltimore Ravens aren't going to be great against the quarterback this week. The Carolina Panthers could give Kyler Murray some struggles, but Jameis Winston, if he just played a little bit better, oh my God, he would have killed the Panthers last week. Tampa Bay Buccaneers playing against good old Daniel Jones this coming week. I don't think Daniel Jones is going to play bad. I don't know what it is. I just have a feeling. The Broncos, the Packers, the Rams, and the Patriots. A lot of these teams have had pretty favorable matchups. Like the Broncos, their averages are better because, when they played against Derek Carr, he only threw one touchdown. And when they played against Mitchell Trubisky last week, he was a garbage can. The Packers played against Mitchell Trubisky one week, and then they flipped it around and played against Kirk Cousins on a terrible week. A lot of these numbers may not be as consistent as possible, but these guys have good defenses. Anyway, let's go ahead. Let's talk about my top 16, rankings at the position. Starting with number 1 has to be Patrick Mahomes. I don't care if you're playing against the Baltimore Ravens. Last season, what the heck happened there? Is that wrong? Am I mistaken something? Yeah, no, we're good. I thought something went off. Okay, we're good. So talking about Patrick Mahomes. So last season against the Baltimore Ravens, if I'm not mistaken, it was week 13-14, played against the Ravens, threw for over 370 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. It does not really matter what defense you put in front of Patrick Mahomes. He is going to be as good as it gets because he is the best quarterback in football. He's the best quarterback in fantasy. And with the weapons that surround him, no matter whether or not Tyreek Hill is out there or Sammy Watkins is out there, he's going to make the players around him that much better. Even with the injuries in the backfield, it does not matter. Patrick Mahomes is going to air this one out. He's going to put up a lot of points. He's my number 1 on the week. Moving on to number 2, Dak Prescott. It's too easy for Dak Prescott this week. Sure, Michael Gallup is out, but you're playing against the Miami Dolphins. This could be a week where Zeke goes for 200 rushing yards. There's always a possibility of that. But with Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, shifting this offense into a pass-heavy team, Dak Prescott has looked fantastic thus far this season. He's going to air it out. He's going to find Cooper, Witten, Randall, Smith, Jarwin. They have a lot of pieces, even Zeke out of the backfield. They have a lot of pieces, and it's too easy of a matchup. Like anybody against the Miami Dolphins can be a top 5 quarterback on the week. It doesn't matter what team you play for. So Dak as my number 2, it's just easy picking. Moving on to number 3, Lamar Jackson. I think from what we've seen Lamar Jackson produce in the last 2 weeks, it's pretty impressive. Obviously, the defenses that he's gone against have not been great against the quarterback position or against the wide receiver position, but I don't think the Kansas City Chiefs are very much different. I think the Kansas City Chiefs sometimes can hide behind the fact that they make a couple plays here and there, force a couple turnovers, which Lamar Jackson, could potentially do. But I think with his ability to run the ball, with his ability to air it out, finding his favorite targets, Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown, it's going to be a pretty good game for Lamar Jackson. I think if you can potentially throw the ball as much as he does and still run for 120 rushing yards, how can't you be in the top 5 quarterbacks every single week? He has the potential, and he's completely been acting upon it and playing really well. I mean, it's just nothing else that needs to be said. I don't care about the matchup. I don't care that it's at Kansas City. Even if Patrick Mahomes gets up early, Lamar Jackson's going to have to come back and he's going to have to air it out. So we'll see how that goes. Moving on to number 4, Tom Brady. He's playing against the Jets. I mean, the Jets have Luke Falk as their starting quarterback. That's not going to be anything at all in my eyes. It's just, it's going to be a one-sided affair, plain and simple. Tom Brady is going to be able to do what he wants against this defense, as he usually does. There's a reason why the New England Patriots haven't lost the AFC East in over, 11, 12 seasons. Tom Brady's going to have a good week with Antonio Brown, with all the other weapons that he has somehow gathered this offseason. Josh Gordon coming back, Rex Burkhead being used more and more every single week. I think this offense is just primed and ready to go this week. Tom Brady's my number 4. Moving on to number 5, Russell Wilson playing against the New Orleans Saints secondary, which should be a good matchup. If, in fact, Teddy Bridgewater or Taysom Hill is the starting quarterback of that team, because they have yet to announce it, it'll probably be Bridgewater. But the way that I'm looking at this is that Bridgewater is going to struggle, giving Russell Wilson more opportunities, whether they run the ball heavily or pass it. Russell Wilson has been a consistent quarterback throughout his career. 5 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks, 2 in week 1, 3 in week 2. And I think going forward, Russell Wilson is set to just continue to play as consistent as usual. 2 touchdowns at least, with the upside of a performance boost because of the matchup itself. I like him as my number 5. Number 6, Deshaun Watson playing against the Chargers in LA. I think Deshaun Watson's week in week 2 was a struggle because of the defense. Jacksonville always poses a threat to them, and the fact that Jalen Ramsey is going to lock down DeAndre Hopkins, it really stifles, or it does not do Deshaun Watson, any justice. Because he's not really able to find any other receiving options. They ran the ball nearly 20 times with Carlos Hyde. Will Fuller was barely used. Kenny Stills had very little target share, and the offense really struggled. Going into this week against the Chargers, they should be able to run the ball more successfully, set up more play actions, and have an easier time getting the ball to DeAndre Hopkins, who really is the entire offense of this team. Without DeAndre Hopkins consistently contributing, Deshaun Watson is pretty much just gone. There's a reason why he only put up 13 points last week in 6 point per passing touchdown leagues. But this week I think he should get back on track. He should have another big week, and that's why he's my number 6. Moving on, and especially the running ability. I mean, when you get that ability to rush the ball with Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott matching Mahomes. I know his ankle's a little busted, but that's just an extra aspect of being able to get more fantasy points for you that I always want on roster. All right, moving on. Number 7, Aaron Rodgers into a good matchup at home this week against the Broncos. Should be fine. I think the performances of the last 2 weeks haven't done Aaron Rodgers much justice. Week 1 was tough because of the matchup and the game script. Week 2, they got ahead early and pretty much just wanted to sustain the lead. Weren't able to do much in the second half in terms of scoring. But Aaron Rodgers against the Denver Broncos should be able to take advantage of this defense and put up a pretty good performance. And that's why he's my number 7. Cut and dry. I like him a lot this week. Moving on to number 8, Josh Allen continues to move up the charts here because Josh Allen, like I mentioned before, he has the running ability, has a fantastic matchup, and he's playing like a good quarterback, finding his weapons and taking advantage of all of the potential opportunities that he has. With John Brown as a new weapon, Cole Beasley brought into this offense, Frank Gore. This entire offense has had a renovation. The only thing that has stayed consistent is a couple offensive linemen and Josh Allen. Everything around him has changed, and he's continuing to improve at the quarterback position. And this week against Cincinnati Bengals at home on the Sunday morning game, I think Josh Allen is a guy that if he is still not rostered, I mentioned this last week, even during the quarterback video and the hidden gems. He is a hidden quarterback that a lot of people are just looking past. He has the ability to run the ball. He has the ability to air it out with his arm. And truth be told, I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in terms of fantasy in the league right now. Obviously, week 4 against the Patriots is going to be the true test, but we don't have to worry about that right now. Against Cincinnati should be easy pickings. That's why he's my number 8. Let's move on to the second half of quarterbacks that I wanted to go over today. Number 9, Matt Ryan, playing against the Indianapolis Colts. I think this offense, if they cannot get the run game going, they consistently end up abandoning the run game pretty early. Devontae Freeman in the last 2 weeks has only had 19 rushing attempts, which is not great at all. Ito Smith has obviously came in and got some production here and there, but the Atlanta Falcons with Dirk Cutter as their offensive coordinator, they just want to air the ball out. Matt Ryan obviously needs to tighten a couple screws here and there because he played awful against the Eagles this past week. The Eagles do not have a good secondary, and he consistently was throwing interceptions. Three touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Barely saved this week with a couple of those bombs that was caught by Ridley, and that bubble screen by Julio. But I think Matt Ryan should be able to consistently produce at the quarterback position. For an offense that wants to throw the ball 60+% of the time, it gives him an inherent value that a lot of these other quarterbacks are not going to have because they want to consistently run the ball and have a balanced offensive set. But Ryan going forward into this matchup, even though it's not beautiful in terms of being able to pick apart a secondary, I think Ryan will be just fine. He's my number 9. Moving on to number 10, yes, I have Jameis Winston as my number 10 quarterback. And I know what you may be thinking. Jameis Winston has been very inaccurate, has been turning over the ball consistently, has not played well at the quarterback position. I 100% agree. But when you play against the Giants defense cannot stop a soul. If they want to prove me wrong this week, they absolutely can. But I'm going to be starting Jameis Winston in a couple of my leagues because this is an easy matchup. Whether it's Chris Godwin or Mike Evans as the number one wide receiver, doesn't matter. Whether it's Peyton Barber or Ronald Jones, this is going to be a one-sided affair. If this Tampa Bay defense can stop Daniel Jones, which they should be able to, and stop Saquon Barkley like they stopped Christian McCaffrey last week on Thursday night, there is a chance that Jameis Winston has the ball very often in his hands, and they are scoring a lot of touchdowns. And that's why I have him as my number 10 quarterback. I know he struggled, but this is the week to turn it around. Moving on to 11, Kyler Murray. I don't know what it is, man. I just have a feeling about Kyler Murray this week. If Kyle Allen is the quarterback on the underside of the ball, and this Arizona Cardinals team at home can force him to make mistakes or force this offense to kind of struggle early on because Cam's not out there. I understand there's always a chance that if Kyle Allen comes in and he's playing way better than Cam, because there's no way that you could play worse than Cam did on that Thursday night. He threw the ball 51 times and only completed 25 passes. So I really do think that if Kyle Allen comes in, this offense could shift in a direction in which there's a potential that this Panthers offense could get better. There's always a chance of that. But I do think that if Kyle Allen comes out and struggles, Kyler Murray's going to have a lot of opportunities to score. He has looked good in the passing game against some pretty tough matchups in the first couple weeks. But I do think he's only going to improve. And this week, I think it might be the week for him to have one of those good breakout performances, 2+ touchdowns on his hands. That's why he's at my number 11. Moving on to 12, Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a little tricky because the running game for the Los Angeles Rams really dictates everything. It dictates their offense as a whole. Their play action really opens up everything. My concern is, in the first 2 weeks of the season, Todd Gurley's had a goal line touchdown, and Malcolm Brown stole 2 in the first week. In terms of quarterback production, unless Jared Goff is really throwing the ball a lot and he's completing 2 to 3 touchdown passes, we can't have him in this top 12 conversation. But I do think this week's matchup is a lot better than a lot of people think. When we go and look at matchups according to how many points defenses give up to the opposing quarterback, we'll see that the Cleveland Browns have been pretty decent against the quarterback position. That's just not the right case. Sure, week 1, Marcus Mariota 3 touchdowns, decent game, but he really didn't even play that well. It was just a product of the interceptions, the penalties. In week 2, you played against a second and third string quarterback that should have never been on the field. Of course, you played well against them. So I think Jared Goff going into Cleveland this week could have himself a decent week here and put up a good amount of points. All right, moving on to 13, Baker Mayfield. In this matchup, the thing is, I really do think that 12 through 16 is very interchangeable. I think any of these guys could vie for that top 12 spot because we've seen the consistencies of Matthew Stafford, Phillip Rivers, and Jimmy Garoppolo over the last couple weeks, and they go into pretty easy matchup. I think maybe even Matthew Stafford could vie for that number 12 spot here. But when we're talking about Baker Mayfield, this offense is a little tricky. Jarvis Landry, just nowhere to be found. David Njoku broke his wrist, out for the season. You really only have Nick Chubb and you have Odell Beckham Jr. as offensive threats in this offense. And if this offensive line is going to play as bad as they have, and Baker Mayfield is not going to make great decisions, he could struggle this week. But I do think that the Rams defense isn't good enough to make him pay for these mistakes that he could potentially make. And I think he could he could end up with a pretty decent week here if you can find Odell Beckham more often than not. He needs to use Jarvis, man. Jarvis Landry is just not even being, he's not even being featured in this offense. It's a little tricky, especially with Rashad Higgins out the other day. I don't understand where Landry went. Landry's dropping balls that he shouldn't be either. Okay, moving on to 14, Matthew Stafford. Again, I really do think Matthew Stafford could be put into that 12 spot against the Eagles secondary into a good matchup. The Eagles will be missing a lot of players as a whole because of injury. This could be a one-sided affair. There is a very good chance that Matthew Stafford with Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones really takes advantage of this secondary's weakness and has himself a very good week. So I have him at my number 14. Really could be played as high as 12 or 11. Moving on to 15, Phillip Rivers, good old faithful. Had a tough matchup against the Lions. The Lions are pretty good against the opposing quarterback, but I think getting back on track at home this week is the plan against the Houston Texans. I really do think that Phillip Rivers will get back on track, and there's not going to be an issue. 2 touchdowns is probably in his sights this week as Mr. Consistency. Moving on to 16, Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy G, really good matchup. As long as he can float the ball and they don't just completely avoid passing the ball. Last week, because of how one-sided that Bengals matchup was, they ran the ball over 30 times. And if that's the case, and Jimmy Garoppolo has to contend with, hey, we're just going to run the clock out, it's going to be tough. Obviously, there were a couple deep passes to Marquise Goodwin that worked out, a couple screen passes that was taken in the house that definitely helped Jimmy Garoppolo. But I think this could be a one-sided matchup here in San Francisco, and Jimmy G could have himself another good week in fantasy and making these 49ers a 3-0 potential team. There's always a possibility of that. Okay, those are my top 16 quarterbacks of the week. There are other guys. There are Mitchell Trubisky's. There are Case Keenums. There are Carson Wentz. There are other quarterbacks out there that I think could potentially have good weeks, but due to matchups, due to inconsistencies, and due to injuries around them, I think there's always a chance that I would probably avoid them and go for the guys that are on the screen as we speak. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you haven't yet already, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and until later today, which will be the tight end video, thank you, everybody, for watching. I'll see you guys. Peace.